we were more focused on video, movies, TV shows, that sort of thing than music in the very early days. But quickly and fortunately realized that while it was going to be very hard to get the licenses to do what we wanted to do with music, it was going to be impossible to do it for video in that form. And I think that was the correct realization, since no one has been able to properly do a Spotify for video, even now, 10 years later. There's Netflix, etc., but none of them have anywhere close to like a complete catalog of video content.
Yep, and moving from Stardoll to Spotify, you were engineering manager there. What lessons did you bring over to Spotify when you were starting the team, especially?
So I wasn't at Stardoll very long. I started out as a developer and then started managing the tech team pretty quickly. So it was, I guess, a fast but short career. And then I joined as CTO at Spotify and hired a team there. I think it was really there where I learned the ropes of like leading a tech team, I would say, more than at Stardoll.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure many founders here would like to ask, how did you hire at that point? How do you make people stay and not leave to established companies?
Making people stay was very easy in the early days of Spotify. Of course, now it's a big company with, I think, 1,700 employees, 700 in engineering. So, of course, there's turnover, and many of the people who were there early have left. Some are actually still around. Some of even a few of the very early team that I hired are still there, but many have left, of course. Some of them have started other companies. Others have joined other startups or larger companies. So, but in the early days, it was not hard to get people to stay because it was very, very interesting, very challenging, very inspiring work. Even though there were a lot of uncertainties around, whether it was going to even work at all as a company, because it took from founding the company until we were actually able to launch publicly with music licenses for the streaming service, it took 2.5 years. So, of course, lots of uncertainty. No external funders really wanted to back the company before it was clear that we would get the licenses. So people took a lot of personal risk, I guess, in one sense of putting their career, betting their career on this startup. On the other hand, people got to do a lot of different things. People learned a lot. So retaining people was not a big problem in the beginning. Hiring people very early was also relatively easy because, as I'm sure many of you who are founders or hire people here, like when you start out, you can quite easily tap into your own personal network. I would say especially if you're kind of fresh out of school, a lot of people that you did go to school with who who were the best in class and or in a specific field that you're recruiting for, and you can easily reach out to them. And if you have something exciting, it's not that hard to get them on board, I think. Eventually, of course, if your company is successful and grows, you saturate that personal network and even your second your next level network and so on. So eventually it becomes more traditional recruiting. You start hiring recruiters, you start using external recruiters.
Yeah, then you always hear founders saying, how do I find a CTO? How can I find someone technical to do this with me? What would your advice be? What are your hiring or vetting mantras?
Depending on your stage. I mean, if you're at the stage where you're looking for your CTO, probably it's easier to think of the role you're looking for as your technical co-founder. I would say, sure, if you've already raised a ton of money and you're more okay, I'm actually going to hire and employ someone and pay them a good salary, then yeah, you might be more recruiting for a CTO. But if you're pre-funding, then you're probably more likely to be successful if you think about it as you're finding your technical co-founder. I think also that's kind of a little bit of a difference where if you look at companies in Silicon Valley and companies elsewhere, and that's not just this region, it's similar in Europe, but here it's more uncommon that you have technical founders that might be looking for, their business person or whatever. Right? Here it's much more common that you have a more sort of a person with a business background, and they have an idea and they need someone technical to build it. So I think as a community, it's good to encourage like a mindset where the person starting the company might as well be the most technical person in the company.
Mm-hmm. And when you first started out the tech team at Spotify, what did the structure look like?
Well, initially it was just me and a bunch of engineers, very simple. At some point, I kind of overextended, I think, my own management abilities and promoted one of our engineers to be an engineering manager or a VP engineering, whatever you want to call it. And over time, the person who had initially had that role transitioned and became like the head of product, and another developer stepped up and became the new head of engineering. And we also had a guy who was kind of the head of operations, which was initially, just him bossing over himself. But of course, eventually start hiring more like tech ops, or today you might say DevOps people. So the organization grew very organically as it was needed, and eventually started having kind of maybe one more layer where you had tech leads that would report into the head of engineering. And but it was, while I was there, it wasn't huge. We were maybe 50 or so in engineering, so we didn't need a very complex structure. I'm sure some of you have seen some of the videos that Spotify has put out about its engineering structure that is quite sophisticated and complex. I think, and I often get questions at events like this about that, and people are like, okay, how can I use that in my company? But often people asking that have a company with maybe 20 employees and maybe 10 in engineering, and that's like, you don't need that. You don't need any of that. So that's something that comes much later.
It's just like how WhatsApp has a team of 50 or so as well. And budgeting is a very big thing that people struggle with. How did you budget for your team in R&D? I know that Spotify had quite a lot of money and they said no aim to spend. Were there things that you prioritized for budgeting?
We didn't budget much. I'm personally not a big believer in budgets. Budgets tend to be, it's very hard to set them. It's like a lot of guesswork. And then once you have set them, they kind of serve as an allocated amount of cash that the department thinks they need to use, right? You kind of pretty much need to use your budget. You don't want to not have used your budget, because then there's a risk that you might get a smaller budget next year, which will make the manager think he's not as important anymore. So I don't know. I think I'm not sure that budget is the best way to manage the organization. And then, of course, you might ask, okay, so what should you do instead? And I'm not sure if I had a good answer that works in all cases, but we did it more on like a case-by-case basis. Like, what do you actually need money for? What do you actually need resources for? What are you trying to do?
Yep, makes sense on an ad hoc basis. So onwards from Spotify, let's talk about Rap. How did the idea come about? I know that you guys are going head-to-head with Rocket Internet's Drop Gifts, which is pretty much the same social gifting service. How did it come about?
So Rap, we started Rap in the spring of 2011. And the problem we were trying to solve, and the problem the company is still trying to solve, even though the consumer product looks quite different now, is customer acquisition for bricks and mortar retailers. So essentially, how do you get more people into your stores? How do you get them to buy more things? Ideally in a performance-based and targeted way. So many of you probably know how you do this online. So for e-commerce, there's a lot of good options in order to get people in that way. But if you run an offline store, you don't have as many options, because you can't really track who's coming through your door, and you might buy TV ads or billboards or any kind of traditional advertising, but it's very hard to measure the result. It's very hard to target them to a relevant demographics. So we figured, very high level, if you look at the value of doing this, essentially what Google AdWords or similar advertising models do online, it's obviously enormous. Huge companies have been built around this. But still, if you look at retail as a whole, it's like 85-90% offline still. Even though e-commerce is growing fast, it's still very, very much dominated by offline. So if you can figure out a similarly efficient model to do this offline, of course, there's huge potential. The value is just enormous. So the size of the opportunity was very big. And we were by far not the only company trying to solve this problem. You mentioned drop gifts, but even looking broader, like one of our investors eventually in our Series A was Greylock, Silicon Valley-based venture fund, and they're very big believers in this space. As you can see, if you look at their portfolio companies, they probably have 5 different companies besides Wrap that are trying to solve bricks and mortar customer acquisition in one way or another, very different ways, not directly competitive, but still. So that's what we were trying to solve. That's what the company is still trying to solve. Now, the way we set out to solve this initially, like the consumer side of this product, was a social gifting service. But it was actually more tangential. Like we didn't start the company to build specifically a social gifting service. We started it to solve customer acquisition for bricks and mortars, and we ended up trying to solve it initially through a social gifting service. So the way that worked was you could give digital gift cards to your friends, maybe on their birthday or for any reason. And you didn't need to pay for these gift cards because our retail partners had sponsored them. So essentially, the way it worked was someone got a gift card from their friend and they could walk into a store and they could buy something with that gift card because it had a real value. Small donation, obviously, was free. But still, you could go into a store and you could buy something. And that way, the retailers were able to attract people into their stores. It turned out a few years later, after we were cloned by Dropgifts and had fought them off all over the world and during like a crazy period of the company and essentially beat them back and they had given up and shut down their business, it turned out that this was actually not a very sustainable model. We grew very fast. We had millions of users. It grew virally extremely fast, but it turned out that this was not a model that worked very well for retailers to acquire users. So Wrap has been going through a pretty major product pivot and is now doing credit card linked offers product instead. It's also been scaled back a lot geographically, so the company is now back in Europe and targeting 2 much smaller markets. But of course, the hope is that it'll grow back and become bigger again. But it's a much more sophisticated product now. The type of targeting you can do now is much better. The type of data we can deliver to retail partners now is much better.
Yeah, and I know a lot of companies here are about to expand overseas to regional markets, out to Bangkok or Indonesia. What would your biggest advice be around expanding regionally and scaling in that manner?
So one piece of advice is to do it to kind of set your own strategy and do it on your own terms. So we were driven to a very fast global expansion by our Rocket clone. That that they're very aggressive, they're very vocal. They were saying they were going to launch their service in 30 markets, and so our original plan was to try out our service and fine tune it, make it work in Sweden, and then when we believed we had the right product, we would launch it in the US, and then focus on building this market in the US, and after that we would go to other countries. And we were essentially our hand was forced, or we let ourselves be forced to do something very different. We from the day they launched their clone, we had people in 18 markets 3 months later. So very, very fast expansion, but also very, very expensive. So I would say make sure that you know your strategy for why you want to expand and not just look at where your competitors are. And then, once you know where you want to go, I think depends on your product. I mean, some products are very easy to just launch. If you're building an Instagram, there's no reason why it shouldn't be global from day one, and it can easily be. But if you build anything that requires any sort of physical presence, any sort of localization, which most products do, then you need local people on the ground. So you need to hire a local team, and you need to make sure that you have the right connections between your home team and your remote teams, and everyone's on the same page, and they're getting enough support from the home team. They have enough support to localize the product and those kind of things.
Yep, and these days you're pretty busy traveling with your partner Lisa, who's right there, and you're investing via your own fund called Approach. So you guys have a mission which is to live in 10 different countries, right? Can you tell us a bit about where you guys have been, what you've seen, and share a bit of your learnings around companies and founders that you've met?
Sure. So we started this project. It's something we've been talking about for a long time, but we actually decided to do it in this form when we were living in San Francisco about a year ago. And the idea is, as you said, we're dedicating 5 years to this project. The plan is to live for 6 months at a time in 10 different countries, roughly the 10 countries that we believe will be the biggest economies in 20 or 30 years. So the primary reason for doing this is really to learn about the world, because it's a big, exciting place, and it's like, different places are very different. It's very hard to just sit in San Francisco or sit somewhere in Europe and try to be relevant for a very fast growing and very changing world. So I think the only way you can do that is to actually live in different places and learn about it and interact with the people there. Now, having a startup background, we have obviously a startup bias. So doing this, we work a lot with local startups, local investors, and we do want to make our own investments, assuming we find the right companies and are able to contribute something meaningful.
Yep, and the next question would be, what sort of investments are you guys typically attracted to and or are looking to make, and what are some common founder mistakes that you typically see regionally?
So the sort of investments we want, it's like we do early stage investments, ideally first money in, typically before institutional money gets in, simply because later the valuations become too high. We make small investments, so often it's part of an angel, could be part of an angel syndicate or some kind of angel round where you have multiple other investors. But it depends. It'll very much case by case. Type of companies, anything tech related, scalable, not so much e-commerce, not so much gaming, because we don't, it's not really our strength. And you asked about typical founder mistakes.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing you often see, which, and I've done it myself, it's where you kind of think you can build a startup a little bit on the side, and it's very, very understandable why that happens. Like, you have a job or you have some consulting gigs, or you have something you do that's your source of income, and it's very frightening, of course, and difficult to give that up and focus 100% on something that, of course, you believe in it, but you don't know yet that it's going to be a success. But or you might be building a product, but you're also having customers that you're essentially just selling hours to. You're more of a consultancy than you are with a product company. So that various grades between these two models end up making people not focused enough. And that's something that you really need. Unless you're 100% focused on what you're building, I think it's very unlikely that you're going to be successful. I had a period doing that myself after leaving Spotify. Before starting Rap, we were a couple of people working on another idea that could have become a startup, but we were all doing different things as well, and we were 100% focused on that one product. So it didn't happen. So that's one thing I see a lot. I think another issue might be just you're building something that really is, like, the market for it is just too small. It's just too niche, where the economics just doesn't make sense. Like, the investment won't make sense unless it gets, to a certain, depends very much on what type of company it is. Some companies can be very profitable with 1,000 customers, and other companies need, tens or hundreds of millions of customers to be profitable. But sometimes you have a mismatch there. We're building something where, the unit economics of any given user is very small, but the addressable market, at least in the way that company is being built, is not big enough for it to capture a large enough user. Even in theory, even if everything that can go wrong with a startup don't, and the company is nominally successful, it's not going to be a good business.
Yep, what works in the Valley might not work out here. And knowing what you know now, what would you do differently if you could press the restart button?
For anything specifically, or
in your career, until you founded a period.
I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff, obviously, that could have been done simpler. Especially at Spotify, we could have done a lot of things simpler. I mean, we did a lot of things quite complex for for reasons good and bad, but like in hindsight, you could have done things easier.
Can you give us an example?
So for a long time, it got turned off maybe 1 or 2 years ago, but for a long time, Spotify music distribution was handled through a peer-to-peer system, peer-to-peer network, so similar to a file sharing network. If you were running the Spotify desktop application, so we never used this on the mobile apps, but on the desktop apps, if you were running one of those, then your application would participate in other people's music streaming, so just like a file sharing network. And it did cut down bandwidth costs a lot, so it did save money in that sense, but it also made the whole distribution system very much more complex. I think in retrospect, it was not worth it, but who knows?
Have to experiment. So before I open up questions to the floor, I'd like to ask, who's your favorite artist? Or what's your favorite playlist?
My favorite artist, probably right now, it's a Berlin-based producer. His name is Paul Kalkbrenner.
Cool, thanks. And let's take the first question from the floor. Thank you, Andreas.
Hi. So which 10 countries are you going to, and which countries have you been to so far?
So far, we've only been to Indonesia. So we were living in Jakarta the last couple of months. And roughly, like we're quite open to changing this a little bit as we learn, and also like changing the whole framework if we figure out a better way to learn about the world, then we're not going to stick with this framework just because that's what we set out to do. We're very open to changing it. But right now, the countries are roughly in Asia, Indonesia, of course, China, and India, and Japan. In Europe, Germany and Russia, potentially UK and Turkey. In the Americas, US would have been on the list if we hadn't just spent the last couple of years there. So we're going to take that out and add Brazil and Mexico. And then Africa is probably the biggest challenge. Nigeria looks like it might just get into a top 10 list on 30-year perspective, looking at current growth estimates and whatnot. But it depends a little bit on what the state of the country is at that time as well. We might figure something else out that can be representative for Africa. So we're kind of open to tweaking the model a little bit, but it's a lot of emerging economies, but not exclusively. There's also some established big ones that will remain big.
Hi, Andreas. Hi, my name is Stefan. I'm a founder of a startup called Gay Out. Tells you all the concerts and live music and festivals in Asia. Think of it as bands in town for Asia. What advice would you have for startups who are building a product for the music industry?
So I personally am not very keen on working with the content industry. I just think it's a very difficult business, and it's full of it's very different, I think, from the startup community in the sense that people are not particularly willing to help each other out. It's a very frankly, it's a very backstabbing community, unfortunately. So I'm personally not never working with content again. Now, if you are in that industry, then I would say watch your back. Number one. Because no one is going to look out for you. You have to look out for yourself. That's what everyone else is doing. And then I think you're at least in the right part of it, because many of the problems that have formed the business, and a lot of the negativity in the business the last couple of decade or two, is that the recording industry has been shrinking fast as people have moved online, as piracy has been rampant, as other types of services and consumption patterns have replaced the traditional, going into a store and buying a record, which no one does anymore, obviously. But if you look at the music industry as a whole, then it hasn't actually shrunk. It's remained fairly constant over the last decades. What has happened is there's been a big shift of spending from recorded music to live music. So you're definitely in the right part, because it's the sort of backstabbing mentality becomes less of an issue if you are in a growing industry than if you are in a shrinking one. Whenever people are competing for a shrinking pie, it's going to be more difficult. So I think it's going to be it's a hard business to monetize. It's hard to get people to pay for that information. But I mean, the way you can do it is probably by sort of being like an affiliate network, right? Sort of get paid for driving traffic to whoever ends up actually selling the ticket to the venues that you inform people about, or the concerts you inform people about.
Hi, Keith over here. Thanks. There you go. Can you talk a little bit about the handover from the technical co-founder to the CTO role? Because I imagine that would be a very big transition for the company as well as for yourself and the co-founder. What were the things that were done right? What were the things that could have done better?
Right, so I was directly involved in that at RAP when I left my operational role. So I was co-founder and CTO at RAP. Not the only technical co-founder. I would say we had 5 co-founders, out of which 3 were technical. But I mean, that was a pretty smooth and unproblematic handover. The guy who stepped up as the new CTO, he was among the very first who were hired into the company, and had been around from the beginning, and had built a lot of the backend system, and knew all the ins and outs, and also like had a great personality. So that wasn't very problematic. It was a simple handover, I would say. I'm not sure if there's anything like any generic learnings you can draw from that. It would be very. I mean, since it's a very personal thing. It will be very case by case dependent. Depends on who is handing over and who is that's being handed over to.
Hi, yeah. It's not hard to imagine that as a CTO you would place a lot of emphasis on the technical side of business. However, in our modern day and age, products shouldn't be just used, they should be loved. Was there any situation when you had to just back off and let the designers do their thing, when you had to compromise on the engineering solutions and just make sure that people see a nicer thing instead of just technically sound?
I think that sounds a bit like a false dichotomy to me. Like there's no like inherent conflict between something that's well engineered and well designed. I would say more often than not they go hand in hand. I can't recall like specific conflicts where it would be a trade-off between something that looks and feels better and works better. I don't know. I think you need it needs to be. If it looks and feels nice but is broken, no one's gonna like it. And if it's like theoretically works very well but no one can figure out how to use it, it's not gonna work either. I think you need both, and I think often there's some conflict.
Hi, Andreas. Right, that's big. Right, so I think about 10 years ago I worked on a digital music startup as well, so I can totally relate that never work with content providers, such a pain in the butt working them. We live in an interesting day where founders, we don't just found one company, we move on and build new stuff. And you've shown a trend where you would leave the company and move on to the next. So my question is, maybe it's a bit about succession. How do you keep in touch with the companies that you've previously been, and if so, how much of the time do you allocate to company for the first company, second company, and also you've got plans to invest and advise other companies? What do you have in mind in terms of time plan in that sense?
So again, I think that'll be very case by case, and depends on both where you are and like how much you want to work with your previous ventures or whatever, and like how much they need you. In the Spotify case, I had no formal involvement after leaving, but of course I knew at that time the entire company socially, and of course the company has grown a lot, so now I don't know most people, but all the old people are still there. I keep in touch. With RAP, I stayed on the board for a year after I left. It depends. In terms of investments, That's going to be very much. I mean, in some cases, I'm on the board of the companies that I've invested in, but in many cases, not. So, in those cases, it will be very much. That's going to be very much up to the company. Like, I would never try to force my input on a company if it's not asked for. Then, but if they ask, I'll try to help as much as I can, whether it's with recruiting or tech staff or product or just like fundraising, introductions to other investors, whatnot.
Andreas, this is Ankur, and I'm a founder of Flink. We are into IT automation platform. So, I mean, it's good to know you because I've been following you on your blogs, your expedition of 10 countries and all that. I couldn't find much. How was it planned, and what have the activities you performed in Jakarta? But I would like to know what are your plans for Singapore? Do you already have the list of startups in your schedule, or startup like us can also present and take advices from you?
So we don't have a list of companies that we're going to work with in Singapore. No, we're very very open to getting to know people. So like by all means reach out. I'm sure you can share your contact details through. Yeah, I mean, I'm very easy to find online. My email address is very easy to find online.
Yes, I've just checked your LinkedIn.
Just speak. Yeah, speak.
I just checked your LinkedIn profile and saw you working in CERN for a few months as an intern. I imagine you wanted to do research at your future career choice, and what changed your mind? Because I'm also doing research in a university, but I also have some ideas that I want to develop. I mean, I don't know, how do you choose between scientific research and a startup?
Very good question. I mean, you never know what could have been, right? I was at CERN over the summer of 2004, I think. I was working on the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, the one that ended up finding Higgs boson. So I was working on the Atlas experiment on the data collection network. So it was a computer side of it. I'm not a physicist, but of course, almost all the other people who were there were physicists. Great work, great place to be, very, very inspiring. I was even offered an Intel-sponsored PhD role while I was there. So the choice you mentioned was very concrete. Like, do I take this up? Do I move to Switzerland and do a PhD there? Or do I go back and pursue this whole startup thing that I've been thinking of? And I don't regret the choice I made, but I can't say that the one thing or the other is more interesting. It depends a little bit, I think, on, and it also doesn't necessarily preclude. Just because you do your PhD for 4 years, whatever, doesn't mean you can't start a company after that. Or just because you start a company now doesn't mean you can't at a later stage go back to research. So you can probably find time for both during a lifetime. I think for me personally, I did the right choice. I think I would have. I don't think I would have been patient enough to just sort of dig in on one small research topic for 4 years or something. I think your day-to-day is going to be much more varied in a startup environment. I like that, but again, that's very personal.
But what exactly made you make the decision? Maybe it's too personal to answer this question. I mean, what actually made you decide what you wanted to do?
It's not too personal, but it's hard to answer because it's I think it was roughly that reasoning, though I didn't know it at the time because I hadn't worked at a startup and I hadn't worked spent a lot of time doing research either, so I didn't know what either was going to actually be like. I don't know what ultimately was sort of the deciding factor.
We'll take 2 more questions on anyone from the side of the room.
I'm cautious in case it's going to make loads of noise. What unconventional advice would you give an early stage startup?
Wait, what unconventional advice would I give? What kind of startup?
Early stage startup.
Early stage, okay. It's hard to know what's unconventional, right? I kind of like, I mean, there's, Peter Thiel is known as a contrarian, actually. Most here know that about him, and he has this question that he likes to ask people, and that is like, what truth? So what things do you hold true that most people don't? I think by starting with that sort of thought, you might find something like, because if it's something that you want to work on something that's a good idea, of course, but if it's you need to work on something. I believe the market in startups is actually fairly efficient, so good ideas that are obvious will already have been solved, or there will be a lot of other people working on them. But what is a good idea changes over time because it's driven by what's available in terms of mostly technology, but also other things in the world that you need as input to your startup. So things that were a bad idea 5 years ago might be a good idea now. So the question is if you can figure out something like that significantly ahead of most other people, then I think you can find something that can be very successful. Of course, you won't know in advance that it's actually a good idea. You believe it, but time will tell. I can probably hear you, so I can repeat the question.
I'd like to know, from your perspective, how to deal with competition, especially from the likes of Rocket Internet.
Competition. Yeah, the question is how did I view competition, especially with Rocket Internet? So I think myself personally, I'm not extremely competitive. Like I don't care that much about what others are doing. So if I've been calling the shots all by myself, I would probably the company would probably have been a lot less bothered by the rocket competition than it were. As it were, we had a very highly competitive CEO and some highly competitive board members that were arguably personally offended by being cloned by Rocket and had to fight back, and we did. I'd say in some cases it's probably the right thing to do. In other cases, I'd say in Rap's case it was not the right thing to do, but we didn't know that at the time. The problem was that we had what I would think of in retrospect as a bit of false positive on our product market fit validation. It looked like we had a product that would work really well. It was growing very fast and everyone loved it. It turned out that it was not sustainable, but we didn't know that at the time. So if we assumed that the original Rap product would have been as successful as we thought, and as it looked like it was going to be, then it would probably have been the right thing to really fight back. And because otherwise we would have not been in a situation where where Rocket would have been dominating that new market in all of these countries, and we would have been in much fewer countries. We would have seceded the majority of market to them. As it turned out, because the initial product was not the right one, we spent a lot of money. We wasted a lot of money on competing with them, and they wasted a lot of money on competing with us. But you don't know that. It's very easy to say in retrospect. More generally, it's good to kind of know what the competition is up to, especially before you start the companies. Often I'm surprised by pitch decks or whatever that I receive where there's okay, but or if you are boot camps or sort of startup weekends or whatever, people are working on something and then you'll be it's not like I spend all my time just reading up what's going on, but I have some sort of superficial idea of what companies are out there, what ideas are out there, and then if you can easily name 3 other companies that are doing this and they're much further, then that might still be fine. But if the potential founders don't even know of these 3 companies, they've not done their homework. So you should be aware of what competition is out there, and you should have an idea about, okay, so they've already been doing this for 2 years, and I'm starting now. How can I be different enough, better enough, so that I still have a chance? But other than beyond that, I would try to spend 90% of your focus on your own business and 10% on your competitor's business.
Yep, and time's up, but thank you, Andreas, for coming this evening. He'll be around for a few drinks, and just catch him after. Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks to our sponsors, DBS and the Hub and Google for Entrepreneurs. If you have any questions, please let us know. And Sun, our chapter director for Singapore, has something for Andreas. Thanks, everyone. Please have some beers.